It's a question of inspiring, of reimagining a future that is inspiring, a story of ourselves that is inspiring, that is not humans are ending the world. They are depleting everything. We are the worst species in the world. We're not. We're also the most beautiful one. We're also the most complex one. We are also the most biodiverse species. And we have the most sophisticated brain capacity to synthesize information in the entire planet. And with the fastest. And the one that connects in the most sophisticated way. So yes, we have a big ability for being very shady, for a lot of obscurity, in the bad sense of obscurity, for a lot of destruction. But our ability to emerge light is equally big.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political, and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Isabel Cavalier. She's a Colombian changemaker who envisions an equitable transition towards a clean, just, and regenerative economy. Isabel is a former diplomat for Colombia, and she represented Colombia as a delegate in the UNFCCC. During her time there, she helped create the women-led Independent Alliance of Latin America and the Caribbean. Since leaving international politics, Isabel has co-founded Transforma, which is a Bogota-based think tank on the climate and ecological crisis. She still sits on the board, but she's soon launching Mundo Común, a new project which is all about culture. How to create systemic change by inspiring individuals to transform their culture within themselves, their locale, their local politics, and how they relate to the world. Isabel talks about how cognitive dissonance is the mark of our time, how top-level politics is disembodied, and that in order to combat the climate crisis, we're going to have to heal our relationships with ourselves, with each other, in the world, and that will involve an embodied politics. A politics that connects, invites togetherness, collectivity, well-being, and community autonomy. Isabel has a lot of hope for our world, explaining that systems change is not linear, and thus culture change is not linear. She also gives a vision for how the world could look like. A future in which we're cleaning up the mess that we've made, and in doing so, situating humankind as a custodian of nature and of one another. This is a wonderful and inspiring episode, and I really hope you all enjoy it. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter inspired by each episode delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who believe in Planet Critical and keep the project going every week. Isabel, thank you so much for joining me on Planet Critical. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Rachel. The pleasure is mine. Thanks to you and to all of the audience listening to us today.
Yes, thanks to them too. What an important note. So, could you give us a quick swing, if that's possible, through your diplomatic career, going up to the founding of Transforma, the climate think tank, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So my diplomatic career started back in 2011 when I really wanted to have an international experience and a government experience, and a very good friend of mine and mentor, Isabel Cavalier, hired me for the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to hold the climate portfolio. Back then, I was not really into any environment or climate deep interest, but that really brought me home. And then I spent the following several years, I think all the way up to 2017, in and out of the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also advising the group of countries that was conformed during those years, the Independent Alliance of Latin America and the Caribbean, ILAC, in the UNFCCC. But also after that, for a couple of years, I also advised the Colombian Mission to the UN in New York on all of their sustainable development portfolio. So that was like in a big brush, the years I did work as a diplomat. That stopped back in 2017 when I joined the Mission 2020 team, working with Cristiana Figueres and other beautiful human beings. And at the same time, founded the think tank based in Colombia with another two amazing women, Transforma, that was dedicated to climate and ecological transitions policy in Colombia and Latin America. So that was back then in 2017. Now life has changed quite a lot. I have been working as an international expert on climate politics since 2019 until now, and I have also recently just founded another initiative called Mundo Común that has nothing to do with diplomacy, but everything to do with climate. We can speak about that later.
Okay. Could you define climate politics actually for us? And we'll get into that, because obviously what we're seeing on this sort of international political stage is an inability for countries to come together and, negotiate correctly and take unilateral and bilateral decisions. So what is the geopolitical landscape of climate politics looking like?
Well, I think that is one side of the perspective, to see that countries are unable. My sensation is that countries have been impressively able also to agree to a ton of things. When you are inside a multilateral negotiation, you realize how hard it is for so many countries to agree on anything at all. So having agreed to anything, but including to the Paris Agreement, which is pretty outstanding, is a really hard thing to achieve. So I think we actually have seen a lot of progress. And if we were to imagine the world without the agreements that we have seen, I think we wouldn't be in a better world. You asked me what is climate politics, and I would say there are many potential definitions of it, but if you look at it from the global perspective, it is all of that exchange of power and relationship related to how we will, as a humanity, address the climate crisis, and the decision making that goes along with it. That obviously has a level that happens at the international stage, where state, as in national state, take decisions on how we will cooperate to address that crisis as a world. But that then has a cascade of levels all the way down to the micropolitical stage of how we decide in our communities. And all of those levels are truly important for addressing the climate crisis. That is why, and because all of those levels are important, all the way even to the individual and how we understand ourselves in the world as individuals, I think that is why my trajectory has moved all the way from working at the global level with the negotiations of the UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, during all of those years, and while Paris was negotiated, etc., down to today, 2023, when I'm founding Mundo Común, that is dedicated to how really we change our culture, our cultural patterns, so that we can actually address the climate crisis from the deepest root causes of this crisis that are well beyond just deciding on how we will share a public resource, as in the atmosphere, or the ability to move economically to another place where we are right now, but really into the deeper identity definition of us as humans in the world that are now defining how the earth is evolving, as in the Anthropocene. So all of those levels are political. All of those levels involve power in some way and decision making that then creates ripple effects in our material reality.
Gosh, there's so much there. The first question that comes to mind is, okay, yes, progress has been made, but certainly what we've seen is like the Paris Agreement was a wonderful piece of legislation at the time. However, there's no binding legislation. It was pledges that are made, and we're bursting through all of the budgets that were set there, which is why a lot of activists are sort of saying, keep 1.5 alive while we can. even though already this year we're looking at potentially bursting through 1.5 as the global average temperature increase, given the heat waves that are taking place in Asia right now, and it's only April.
Mhm.
You talk about culture. I mean, this is something that comes up a lot on the show, is like our very sort of, yes, identity as homo economist or economicus, or somebody will correct me on that, has to change. Why can't that cultural change happen at the top? Why is it that
Well,
politics seems to be quite far behind when you compare this with the
mhm.
grassroots organizing and movement that are taking place all around the world to tackle these issues?
I love your question. I wish I had a straightforward answer. Um,
Hmm.
yes, I agree. Paris was a great piece of legislation for its time, and the world has changed a lot since
Hmm.
2015 in many different directions. I think when you are observing our world nowadays, it's both frustrating because you both see that emissions keep on rising and we keep on
Hmm.
depleting from our ecosystems and ourselves. And it's also true. We've never seen so much progress in terms of how
Hmm.
ubiquitous the climate narrative is in the world, how
Yeah.
ubiquitous it is for companies, states, regions, people to know that there is something called climate crisis and to actually undertake commitments. Um, think about the net zero expression, the net zero
Hmm.
goals. When we were negotiating Paris, it was completely unthinkable that we would be where we are in only, what is it, 8 years from now? It was unthinkable that renewable energy would be the most installed form of energy in the world only 8 years from where we were in 2015. And so both trends are true. We are living in a
Yeah.
reality where it's paradoxical, but it's both happening. We are moving along very far and very fast, and at the same time we aren't doing enough and we keep on depleting. And those two, that cognitive dissonance is
Mm.
is I think the mark of our times, and we need to be really cautious to always look at both sides of that coin. And so I would say that that's the first point to answer your question. The second
Mhm.
point is why you're asking, why is there so much difference between the high level or international politics and the grassroots? I'll start by a short anecdote. Last week, I was talking to somebody who was describing what I was doing on sort of shifting culture. And I was saying, why do we keep on saying that there's some people working on the ground or at the grassroots level and some other people not on the ground, as if we were
Mm.
human people to be on an ivory tower? And cognitive, like in our minds, yes, but in our bodies, no. Everyone is attracted by the force of gravity and everyone is walking on this earth, right? Everyone is a person. And I think the main reason why there is that dissonance is because we haven't really, all of us, come home to the fact that a state is its people and a company is people. Um, a region is people. We're all humans embodied in our bodies. We have an embodied experience in our earth. And we have been living in a paradigm since the Enlightenment, basically, or even before, where we have privileged our mental abilities and they are extraordinary. We have come really far, but we have divorced. We are living in a paradigm of separation. We have divorced our mental, rational ability from our intuitive, embodied abilities. Um, and I think that's the main problem, that we have forgotten that we are not just brains walking held by some sort of mushy thing, a body, but we actually are humans, all of us the same, all of us in a body that has an experience in the world. And so because we live in that separation paradigm, even humans separated from nature, for example,
Mm.
mind separated from body, um, we are separated and therefore we have the ability to relate to each other in an extractive way. I think it's because we understand ourselves as separated. And so we also separate the grassroots or the on the ground from the politics. And the politics is somewhere there in a cloud deciding for the world, rather than understanding that this transformation, this transition that we need to live through starts from the deepest individual level and ripples out into the world. And so the very reason why there is so much cognitive dissonance, why we see that the climate community, or those of us seeking to respond to the climate crisis, are so frustrated because we feel that we do a lot and we still emit, is because we are focusing our attention in the wrong places, or not in the wrong places. We are focusing too much attention in all of the rational change of the economy that needs to happen. We need to reduce emissions, but we haven't looked enough at the changes we need to do within our spirits and our ways to understand ourselves in the world, so that the change that unfolds from that is actually the change that changes, that addresses the way our civilization is defined, and therefore why we emit in the first place. We emit in the first place, and our economy is as it is in the first place, because we are extractive, because we are relating to nature in a way that doesn't understand that we need to care for each other rather than extract for each other. We need to care for ourselves rather than extract from ourselves. So in that political world, we still live in the paradigm of extractivism, separation, endless growth, and limitless energy, right? Change the source of energy and we will solve the crisis.
Yeah.
That's completely wrong. We will change the energy source and continue in a crisis because we will be depleting from the earth. And the only way to change that is to changing the way we understand ourselves in the deepest level. So that's where I think the cognitive dissonance comes from. And that's where I think our community, those of us that care for our planet and care for addressing or going through, I will say, rather than resolving the climate crisis, is that we have been contributing to the problem because the solutions and the way we work are based on that old paradigm. So as long as we don't understand that we need to change that paradigm for ourselves, stop burning out, stop thinking that we have it all solved with a brain capacity, then we won't be able to solve that cognitive dissonance, basically. And that's what Mundo Con is all about, basically.
That is fascinating. It reminds me of Ian McGilchrist's work on the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Have you come across that? Yes.
Well, I have heard about it. I don't know about him. But that's another sort of separation. That's another sort of separation, right? Science from art, right? Our creative capacity from our rational capacity. There's all sorts of forms of separation that stem from that original want of I'm separate.
Something that came to mind when you were speaking as well was this idea of the separation of the disembodied nature. And I wonder if those at high levels of institutions have failed to sort of construct a new paradigm because they are disembodied by the very nature of being within an institution, as opposed to being embedded within a community or embedded within a locale and in one environment. They are quite literally uprooted and put into sort of these rationalist ideological constructs, and that's where they exist. And so perhaps then that's part of the reason why it's more difficult for them to become embodied in the changes that we need to make.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that I mean, I was that, right? I've been that. I've been there. But I see that is, I think I'm hopeful because I see that it is changing. I see that we are all longing for connection and hungry for a different way of operating in the world that is more respectful of what we remember, because it's a memory that we are as humans. We're eager for having jobs that are more playful and more caring for our energy, eager for jobs or meeting spaces where we can express our emotions somehow, rather than just be the rational human being that I'm supposed to be. I see that we in general see people are eager for jobs that allow for more creativity. Wherever you are, is it in a big company or in a public service or in an NGO or in a wherever. And so that while that is true, I see that this is percolating softly to all different sorts of places. And I think it's not just the fact that you're in an institution, it's the kind of culture that we are, let's say, rehearsing and repeating and nurturing. Because it's not that we are going to stop having institutions if we change the paradigm. It's that our institutions will look different because we will have a different way of approaching ourselves and our way to relate to each other and our way to relate to an organization or an institution. We are social by nature. We won't stop socializing. We won't stop having social structures, but the structures will look differently if we ourselves are different. That's why I think the change really starts from ourselves and what we allow ourselves to do, right? It's almost as if we were wearing some kind of costumes. Like I am wearing now the civil servant costume. So I need to be serious. I need to be rational. I need to be productive. I need to work extra hours and deliver quickly a lot of things. But I'm the same me. So I come out of the office and I want to play, connect, do other things. Why do we need to keep those worlds so separate? I think people are starting to dawn to the fact that all of those costumes, they're costumes, but we're all human, and we're all the same. We're all the same. We long for the same. We long for connectedness. We long for loving relationships and caring relationships. And so, I think it's starting. It's starting. It's different. I feel very different today than how it was 10 or 20 years ago. The kind of things people are allowing themselves in meetings, even in meetings of our own community, it's completely different. People are allowing themselves to, okay, let's have a breathe. Let's breathe first and then let's meet. And that would have been completely unthinkable 20 years ago or 15 years ago in the kind of work we do.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that there is a real hunger for change and an awareness of the necessity, right? Because our social fabric is eroding, essentially. But a problem that comes up time and time again is that communities are sort of denied access to the resources with which they can mobilize and organize and regain some kind of autonomy and create their own cultures, especially in nations whereby people don't know how to grow, like food security, they don't know how to grow their own food, they can't provide their own housing, these kinds of things. And so they are dependent on a nation state that we are seeing is increasingly sort of open about its disregard for its own citizens and the climate and ecological breakdown that's in many governments around the world. I mean, I'm speaking as a British citizen. Our government is just mad. They've completely lost the plot. And so given the fact that this is an urgent problem, that it's not just that we have to go through a cultural change because that would be good for us. We have to go through a cultural change because if we don't, we are facing ecological breakdown. The last synthesis report said that this is humanity's final warning.
Yes.
So given that we also have that time constraint and that cultural changes take a long time typically, I mean, can you speak to that? Where do we go? What levers do we need to push urgently?
Yes, thank you for that beautiful question. The first answer is systems change is not linear. Time is not linear. Just as science have predicted, right? There are thresholds. Once we, tip that threshold for the good or for the bad, change becomes exponential and you don't control it anymore. And we in the climate space, we tend to think about those as in the very wrong way, right? Like methane escaping from the permafrost and then runaway climate change. That's the classic way we think about nonlinear change. But let's remind ourselves that nonlinear change happens in the other way around too. Cultural change can be nonlinear. Think about the adoption of AI, the curve of it. Sometimes it feels very spooky, but it can also be shifted for the good. And I hope we're thinking already, all of us, about how to do that. ChatGPT was adopted in like a week, had millions of, I don't remember the numbers, but it was the difference between the adoption of Facebook, TikTok, and ChatGPT is exponential. And that is like a very quick cultural habit that is changing very rapidly. Culture can change very quickly. We have this idea that culture takes a long time to change. And yes, in a way it does. And in other ways it doesn't. We don't live in the era of slow paced change anymore. And so we need to remember that. That's the first point. The second point is yes, we are in an emergency. We have very little time left. But the change we need can be done in seconds, right? It's a matter of attitudes. It's a matter of coming to a point of consciousness. I can relate to myself in a different way, and I can relate to the world in a different way. And obviously, to get that, I don't say that I'm somewhere enlightened. Nobody is. I'm a human full of all of the complexities that all of the humans have. But sometimes you can even hear one person speak and think, "Oh my gosh, this is different. I can understand this in a different way. I can relate to myself differently." Um, I was hearing a podcast the other day of a very interesting guy who was saying, do the experiment. Look at someone else for 2 minutes in the eye. Just stay for the 2 minutes. It's just 2 minutes. And you will see the beauty of that other being emerge regardless of who this person is. It takes you 2 minutes. 2 minutes, right? So yes, it's urgent. And because it's urgent, this is the paradox. We need to give ourselves the time to really feel. Because if we don't give ourselves the time to feel, to listen to ourselves, to our intuition, what we will end up doing is we're the hamster wheel of trying to solve it all with our brain, right? And we probably won't come to the solution. It will be probably losing the precious time we have to reconnect. It takes you 2 minutes to reconnect with another human being, right? And so what are the levers we need to touch? Thank you. This is an excellent question. This is what I've been grappling with recently. My sensation is that it's a big responsibility that we all need to take very seriously ourselves. The first is, how can we touch on those places where culture expands quickly, right? How people are nurturing their own cultural understanding, their own identity. So for me, there's a big task for all the people who are telling stories, people who are in the media, people who are in the cultural entertainment, where people listen to the stories about how we are and who we are. That's probably and education. That's where we normally as humans consume information. It is a very interesting. We are living in very interesting times. I was hearing these amazing people speak last week about information, how we consume information, how information spreads. The fact that lies spread 6 times faster online, facts, and anger is the fastest emotion that spreads online. But the only emotional feeling that spreads as fast as anger is inspiration. Inspiration. So it's our responsibility to touch on those fibers that inspire, right? It's not even a convincing. It's not a question of making people think differently. It's a question of inspiring, of reimagining a future that is inspiring, that reimagining a version of ourselves, a story of ourselves that is inspiring, that is not humans are ending the world. They are depleting everything. We are the worst species in the world. We're not. We're also the most beautiful one. We're also the most complex one. We are also the most biodiverse species. Did you know that humans have the most biodiverse gut? Just our gut is the most biodiverse single organ in the entire planet, right? In the planet.
Wow.
And we have the most sophisticated brain capacity to synthesize information in the entire planet, and with the fastest, and the one that connects in the most sophisticated way. So yes, we have a big ability for being very shady, for a lot of obscurity, in the bad sense of obscurity, for a lot of destruction. But our ability to emerge light is equally big. It's directly proportional. And so for me, the levers are in that spaces where culture is created, and all of those spaces that work on our own personal transformation, the inner, more spiritual part of ourselves, of our understanding. And obviously, this does not mean, and I don't want to be misunderstood, this does not mean that we stop working on all of the other important parts. We need to reduce emissions very quickly. We need to transform our economy very quickly. We need to transform all of the sectors of our economy. We need to, all of that transition is very important, but we need to combine it. We need to stop separating it from our understanding of ourselves. We need to be more balanced, find more equilibrium in the two types of work that we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting because it's so obvious, right? That like culture, we live in paradigms that are essentially, self-reproducing cultures. And so of course the culture needs to change. If you want to change the economic system, you have to change the culture. And I think another interesting point with what you're saying about it, starting with self is that certainly in like a globalized world, there aren't very many spaces left for autonomy and for community autonomy. And so, especially in sort of like a technological world, corporations live in our homes with us, governments live in our home with us. So the last sort of vestige of a private sphere in which one can hopefully make radical changes is within self. However, I do want to push back and counter with, the counter argument to that typically is, but if you break it down into individual change rather than systems change, that is a message that can be co-opted and has been co-opted by corporations. Like you watch your carbon footprint rather than us actually.
I fully agree with you. It's not just a question about individual change. It's a systemic change, and corporations are essential. States are essential. Individuals are essential. All of those levels are essential. And I thank you for I don't think it's a pushback. It's a great red flag that all of any narrative can be co-opted for the wrong reasons. So, and it will happen. We need to be aware. It will continue to happen all of the time, and it will continue to reemerge in many ways, because we are able to reinvent ourselves infinitely. That's the capacity of life on Earth. Is reinventing itself once and over again. I would say that although it seems paradoxical, but when you look at reality is fractal. Yeah. It's almost like what we see in our societies is a reflection. What we see in a city is a reflection of its inhabitants. What we see in a community is a reflection of people who are part of that community. And what we see in the world is a reflection of how we are ourselves inside. And this means that it's not that you need to forget the systemic vision to just focus on the individual. Because what I'm saying is the cultural shift we are looking at is not a cultural shift of becoming more individualistic and autonomous. It's the opposite. It's become more connected. It's understanding that we are interdependent. That we live in systems and not in isolation. That there is no way any community, nobody can survive in a bubble by themselves. Not an individual, not a local community, not a municipality, not a city, not a country, nobody. We are constantly sustained, even when you think you're not, by so many beings. Constantly. So it is focusing on our spiritual dimension, but it's not to do it in isolation. It's to reconnect from there to the world that is sustaining life. So that is the only way to approach systemic change, because there is no such a thing as some invisible hand lever at the global level that you can move like this and then suddenly, bam, everything changes. It's going to happen at all of those levels through the actions of human, not through the actions of even AI is an action, is a human creation. That is a human creation. Singularity of when AI sort of run away, artificial intelligence, it's a human creation, right? So it will happen both at the individual level in connection with other humans and other beings more than human that are also collaborating with humans in whatever is happening in our world. And that's how it spreads systemically. But thinking that we can change the system only from above, I think is delusional. I think that is the result of humans that are acting at that level, but they are human.
Sure. I mean, I suppose I presented a binary of system versus individual as well, when in fact a system is made up of individuals, which are not actually individuals, but interconnected beings.
Correct.
And that is the way that the system self-propagates. Yeah. All right. Do you have a story? Do you have a vision for the future?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. That's a great challenge. It's the first time someone asks me that. Yes. Yes. I did a really interesting experiment last week. There's many people working on sort of futures and reimagining our futures. This is nothing new, and I'm not an expert on it. But I did a really interesting experiment with a bunch of people working on climate. That was, let's tell together a story about 2050 when we have addressed the climate crisis. We have addressed it. We have responded to it in a way that is not depleting or that is not fostering other crises, and in a realistic way, not a utopian way. Because I think utopia sparks skepticism and is not necessarily very inspiring for many. For some, it's beautiful. For some, it's not. I think it's important to imagine the future with a realistic and optimistic. It's not that realism is pessimism, not at all. But definitely, it's a choice not to imagine the future from a pessimistic point of view. And so I choose to imagine it from a realistic and optimistic point of view. And the story is, we're going to have to clean up the mess a lot for a long time. But I do think, and I do feel that I hope by 2050, I will still be alive. I hope so. If not, it's okay. But if I am, I'm hoping that by the middle of the century, this emergent new human way of being is a lot more present. It's not the only one, but it's so much more present that it starts becoming prevalent. I don't think this is a change that we will suddenly, oh, look, it's happening. But we will probably turn back and say, wow, we are living in such a different way today than how we were living in 2020. It's completely different. And in that vision, I think there are a few things that I would say there are characteristics that I see emerge. One is we dedicate a lot more energy to our bonds in our communities, wherever that community is. It's not a community necessarily super rural, or any community that you belong. We all belong to a community. We pay a lot more attention to that. There's a lot more emphasis in our local spheres of governance. I don't think that all the way to the global will disappear, but I think that globalization will have stopped being homogenizing, and we will have probably started to understand that the beauty of interconnectedness in globalization is the fostering of diversity, not the homogenization of culture. So that reemergence of the local and of the connected to the territory, I think will be prevalent, will be much more widespread in the world. And we will be struggling still with, as I said, I think we're going to have to clean up for a long time. So ourselves and our kids, we are going to have to be cleaning a lot. So I imagine there's a lot of jobs and there's a lot of dedication to just the cleaning up. And that's going to be almost like a physical act of cleaning ecosystems. And that, I don't know if you've felt this, but when you clean up with your hands, it has a resonance in your own internal cleanup. So I feel that the humanity will be cleaning up a lot of stuff, like a lot of trauma, and that's starting, but it will be a very active thing we do from here to there. I will also imagine in that future that we will still be probably grappling with some dissonance and with pushback and with old paradigms wanting to cling and to say, no, It was better to have endless growth. We were better off. We were going to end poverty. And I think we have started to have poverty differently, not because we don't want to end it. I think we have made a huge progress. We've never been so far, but we will really take it seriously that well-being is something else than just having resources in money. And so people will have different ambitions. Our way of feeling whole will be not just based on power or fame, right? Or money. Our ways of feeling whole will focus more on what the quality of our relationships to the world. I think we will definitely be much more connected to the more than human world, and much more in many ways, much more. Definitely, I think that's a big part of this identity crisis. And so those are like big strokes of how I imagine that. But I would love to work more on that story. Thank you for asking it. I will definitely do it. And getting from here to there, it's not going to be easy. Nobody said it's going to be easy, and it will take time. And I think it will feel like one of those curves where we go like a lot like this. And probably we are there, but it's like, and we need to not be discouraged by this, right? Which I see is we're already there. We're already I see all of those things happening all at once. Yeah. But I won't tell you, I mean, I choose to be optimistic and realistic, but I won't tell you that this completely annihilates my worry, right? I don't think this is a gift. I don't think it will happen necessarily. I think it's something we have to work on. I think it needs our dedication for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. While I still have you then, can you give a sort of brief overview of what is happening politically in Latin America right now? Because from the outside, it looks quite exciting. You know, there's been sort of elections of left-wing environmentalists committed to protecting rainforests and people. And but how is it on the inside?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's important to know that nothing, as you were saying, you were in a binary way, polarizing individual versus system. We shouldn't be in a binary way, understanding left and right or good or bad or any government. I think having a pro-environment narrative is positive, is important, is necessary, but is definitely not enough, and is not good that this is combined with almost like schizophrenic policy on the inside, right? That is undoing with your elbow, with what you're trying to do with your hand, we say in Spanish.
Okay. My
sensation is that there's a lot of hypocrisy as well on both sides of the political spectrum. And that's unhelpful. I mean, when you look at it I can only speak for Colombia, where I'm from and where I live. My sensation is that there's very good intentions to do better on the environmental policy, and that's welcome, very welcome. But at the same time, that narrative needs to be paired with a work that is honest in the difficulties of it, and the fact that it needs to be inclusive of all types of ideologies for it to be successful, and for it to be mindful of what the economy, how the economy can react to those policies. Many times what I see is that even when there is a willingness to do a lot, because of the economic challenges that it poses, we don't end up really living up to it, because poverty is a very acute and very immediate challenge. So the best example is energy transition. I think many countries that are shifted to the left are keen, but the pace of it is not necessarily as fast as the discourse will want to propose it, precisely because economically is unfeasible. And so I think being honest about that is important. And I don't see that honesty all the way. I don't see that honesty. I don't see that transparency. So I think we are beyond left or right at this point. The swing to the left is just another swing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so many times the very left or very right end up having very similar problems, falling in very similar traps. And that's not what will bring us there, because both are polarizing, antagonizing, separating, right? Not uniting, connecting, making us more able to think together in the difference. So I'm not so optimistic with this swing, because it's just another swing of the pendulums, right? Is that a word in English?
Pendulum. Yeah.
Pendulum. To the other side, rather than I'm more of a in politics, I'm more of a radical center kind of person. And I think that we're not there at all. Maybe the swing was necessary, and we are facing huge challenges to see that narrative can be turned into reality everywhere. So that's my own very personal opinion about that.
Okay. It's interesting. I think it's always very good to get sort of an external perspective, or rather an internal perspective, because it certainly looks like a lot more interesting environmentalism and climate policy is happening outside of the global north, because these communities are on the front line. However, when you can see the continuation of globalization and trade and growth, indeed,
Yes.
It does call into question even those policies. Yeah.
And I think it's positive. Change is positive, right? Trying something out is positive. That's good. It's good that we give ourselves a chance to think differently, to look at the problem from another angle, to see why our attempts fail from this angle and from this one too, right? To learn from all of that. I think that's positive. So when I say I'm not so optimistic, it doesn't mean that I think it's positive, but I do think that we need to be always taking perspective, that it's another end. It's not yet, I feel it's not yet the politics of the politics of true unifying democracy. I think it is still the politics of polarization, and that in its essence is a problem. That we are still in the politics of polarization, and that's exactly the opposite of what we need, basically.
Absolutely. But I mean, it seems like we will always be in the politics of polarization until we allow for deliberative democracy and proportional representation and all of these things, all of these
which
sort
can
of
only
tools that are
happen
ready
when
and
you
waiting
go,
to be deployed.
right, which can only happen when you go down to a level that is humanly graspable. That is your local level. You can't really grasp an entire country, for God's sake. You can't even grasp an entire city. You can relate to your street. You understand it. You know exactly where the tree is, or where the pipes are, or where the problems are. You know that. So you can deliberate democratically on that. But the rest is a little bit of an illusion. So that's why I was saying, in that future, we really need to come back to the local level that we can grasp with our bodies, with our human scale. So deliberate democracy, yes, let's do it at a scale that makes sense. Right? So yeah, I agree. I think we can absolutely move away from polarization. We have everything we need to do it. We are in the process. It's not going to happen overnight. But we need to stop clinging to our old ideas about how things should be.
Absolutely.
Allow for the emergence of the new. Yeah.
Isabel, my final question for you is, who would you like to platform?
Right. So my proposed idea is a person who is from Colombia, and she is. Do you do translation, just in case? Maybe you can have a translator. Maybe, I don't know if she speaks English. I can translate.
Okay.
If necessary. She's a musician. And she's someone who is transforming the world of waste into cultural impact to change how people think. She is a luthier, so she's producing all of her musical instruments out of waste. And then she is expanding. She's producer of music, creator of music. She has a band, and she's an educator of schools and young people all over the country, all based on a new way of understanding what is waste. She's excellent. Her name is Andrea Latas, is her artistic name. And I would be delighted to introduce you to her. And if she is not proficient in English, I'll be more than happy to translate if that's necessary. Completely different
Isabel, thank
person.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is such an inspiring conversation too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to you and all of the listeners that came all the way to here with us.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter inspired by each interview. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.